Today is the world of influencers, people whose opinions matter. Some literary mysteries have stoked my curiosity for many, many years. My next unsolved mystery opens up a Pandora box of confusion. Quoting from an interesting article written by Jackson Summers, many years ago, Stephen Skinner and Charles Ward attempted to rank the most significant human beings the world had ever seen, and the top 5 came up, which was very, very baffling. First came Jesus Christ, next Napoleon Bonaparte, followed by the Prophet Muhammad, William Shakespeare, and the 5th, Abraham Lincoln. Just think about this for a moment. On this list, we have 2 individuals of unparalleled religious importance to over half the world's population. 2 men who shaped the future of the continents on which they were brought up. And 1 person, well, what do you think? He was pretty much a man of words. Whatever you think of Skinner and Ward's methodology, Wikipedia has been their main source of information. The very fact that Shakespeare is even mentioned in this kind of company tells you everything you need to know about the man's impact on the world and the most quoted writer in history outside of the office of the Bible. And his plays are performed more than any other globally by a huge margin. And he even introduced 1,700 and more new words to the English language, including words like bandits, lackluster swagger, and undress. And I'm sure you'll agree, he has one hell of an impressive CV. But even so, to the extent to which the man is worshipped even to today, is quite astonishing. The name William Shakespeare is synonymous with greatness and everlasting literary legacy. Who in this world is not familiar with the tragic love story of Romeo and Juliet, the enigmatic character of Hamlet, the madness of King Lear, and dozens of other memorable figures who have entered the canon of playwriting? Shakespeare's works have transcended their original stories and have become the subject of college theses, Academy Award-winning films, seemingly endless volumes of comparative criticism, and much, much more. The collective feeling of Shakespeare we all have is one of reverence, respect, and love for his timeless stories. Yet, beneath the surface of the accolades, praises, and worldwide recognition is a great question that will always loom over his legacy. Was Shakespeare actually a hoax? What we do know, in many, many critics actually believing that he is the greatest hoax of all of the Western literature. True, the name Shakespeare and those works credited to him will always be forever linked and liked, and there will never be a definitive way to attribute his place to another author. Still, it is worth examining the legitimacy of his authorship. There are many, many convincing reasons to believe that Shakespeare was indeed a hoax, that either a single person or many people actually wrote all of the plays normally attributed to one William Shakespeare. Let us look at the following reasons. 1. Convincing proof of his illiteracy exists. Shakespeare grew up in a household in the town known as Stratford upon Avon, a household where no one really knew how to write. The family would sign official papers with a mark and not with a name, which could be an indication of illiteracy. Even further, in this critical and definitive text devoted to the subject of Shakespearean authorship, author Frank Davis is shown as proving Shakespeare as illiterate. showing that every single recorded and known signature of Shakespeare was completely jumbled up, scribbled, and bore no resemblance to the spelling of his actual name. Do you, ladies and gentlemen, think that the greatest, the most clever author of all times would have difficulty spelling his own name? Doesn't seem possible to me, Meenamma. A second reason, no contemporaneous authors acknowledge his death. In his lifetime, it is true that some other actors and writers acknowledge the author known as Shakespeare. However, according to Cornell Emeritus Professor Donald Haynes in his social essay Network Theory and Shakespeare, it appears that no one wrote about Shakespeare at the time of his death, minus some private circulated literary tributes that have since been lost. Curious, since he was a well-known, well-performed playwright in his days. Of course, he had not yet achieved the immortal fame that comes along with the word Shakespeare today. But do you think that someone would have written or could have written about Shakespeare's death? But instead, it took 7 years for someone to actually publish a poem about Shakespeare's death. I'm really curious to know about this. A third reason, he likely had little or no education. There is no documentary proof at all of Shakespeare's education that currently exists. As if he had one, he dropped out at the age of 13. Already a basic grammar school existed within a mile of Shakespeare's home. There is not even a single shred of remotely conclusive proof that he himself had ever attended the school. Also, there is also one pupil who claimed to have recorded the fact that Shakespeare was his classmate. What if you went to school with a famous playwright or someone of significant cultural worth? Wouldn't you tell others you went to school with this person and shout it loudly? A fourth reason, Shakespeare could not have actually known such intimate details about Italy. Most of Shakespeare's plays are set in Italy, but from evidence we have of him, there is no way he could have known as much as he did about Italy. Perhaps he could have traveled to Italy, but he is known for spending most of his time in England. Remember, traveling to another country was much more cumbersome in those days of the 17th century than it is today. There is a book that has proved that nearly every single Italian reference in the works of Shakespeare, including things as obscure as the inland water systems of northern Italy, described in Shakespeare's Two Gentlemen in Verona, is completely accurate to the T. How can a man who spent most of his time in England, whose possible illiteracy was his handicap, be able to decipher, describe in virtuistic detail the miniature of Italian geography and culture? The fifth reason, Shakespeare's will indicates no interest in his own work or any of the other cultures. In his will, William Shakespeare did not write a single word about his 18 unpublished poems and plays, about any of his other single books, or for that matter, any of his writings. The language of the will is also perfectly uninteresting and plain, and sounds nothing at all like the language used in his stories. There also appears to be a complete absence of cultural interest in his own will, which is strange and unusual, not only for a man who wrote such culturally informed literature, but also for a man living in that particular era, which was defined as the Age of Enlightenment. Indeed, only one theatrical reference at all is made in his will, which was actually written in his will after he died, according to the famous biography of Shakespeare. Did you know that for years, people had suggested Shakespeare wasn't the true playwright we think him to be? If he didn't write his legendary plays, who did? We look at the main contenders. Somewhere in Europe in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the greatest craftsman ever to mold the English language into works of art created his masterpiece of poetry and drama. Yet, never before had there been so much doubt of whether or not the bard is actually behind his greatest works. The few documents that have survived from Shakespeare's day paints a picture of the Stratford man as an unrefined, possibly even unsavory character of no apparent education or reputation as a writer. In fact, there is nothing in the surviving local records other than 6 signatures in barely legible scrawls that can be proved and regarded that Shakespeare was illiterate. It is common premise that all the alternate authors that the mundane events describing and surviving records of Shakespeare's life strongly talks about his authorship. The townspeople of Stratford are hardly likely theorists. Some of the Stratford citizens would have left behind impressions. Not only are there no indications in the hometown that the great dramatist lived in Stratford, there are otherwise no books, manuscripts, or relics that the writer himself might have experienced or expected to leave behind. A lack of education and the Bacon theory. The first theory to explicitly suggest that the Stratford man was not the true author was formally put forward in 1785, based on the unexpected scarcity of existing documentation and on references within the plays themselves that seemed to indicate that the writer was far more educated than Shakespeare could have been. Reverend James Wilmot, rector of Barton-on-the-Heath, proposed that Francis Bacon, the aristocratic Elizabethan philosopher, was the true author. This incurred Queen Elizabeth's anger. In addition, an Elizabethan dramatist always ran the risk of incurring the Queen's wrath should any of his plays contain political satire that gave offense to Her Majesty. Only by preserving his anonymity could the true author be sure he would not suffer the consequences of Elizabeth's anger. These consequences and concerns did influence some Elizabethan dramatists, leading to a subculture of concealed poets amongst the nobility. But there is no firm evidence that the author of the Shakespearean's work was amongst them. While speculation to this effect has been used to answer some intriguing questions about the authorship of the plays, it must remain only one of many possible explanations that the likelihood might be uncertain. Argumentably, it is easier to imagine the rustic Shakespeare writing these outstanding plays than to imagine another author being so ashamed to hide and admit that he had. Further, a concern over political content seems inappropriate in connection with the Shakespearean works. Overall, the play's benign pro-Tudor nature is so pervasive that one group of theorists have even argued they must have been commissioned by Elizabeth herself to serve pro-government propaganda. Was Shakespeare merely an accomplice? The case for Christopher Marlowe is based on a different premise. According to Calvin Hoffman, the originator of this theory, Marlowe was already under royal disfavor when he secretly wrote the plays. In order to escape execution, Hoffman says Marlowe fled to the continent. His patron, Sir Thomas Walsingham, staged a fake murder so it would appear that Marlowe was dead. The plot was supposedly successful, and Marlowe continued to write plays from France, with the Stratford actor serving as a front by which his work would be introduced into England. This theory is technically feasible, but there is no documentary evidence to support, and is perhaps the most enlightening and simple example of how easy it is to concoct an explanation that fits the few available facts. The most exotic of these internal clues are the supposed Baconian ciphers. Originally formulated by Ignatius Donnelly, this theory holds that Bacon, while unable to reveal himself during his lifetime, put coded messages into his published works to ensure the future generations would honor him. Other Baconians have expanded on Donnelly's ideas, and by applying their theories have extracted such hidden messages as Shakespeare never writ a word of them, and these plays, the offspring of F. Bacon, are preserved for the world. Conclusive to these results might seem, the professional cryptologist Friedman published an exhaustive analysis of Baconian ciphers which demonstrated that none were valid. While many orthodox scholars concede that there is room for doubt in the record of William Shakespeare of Stratford, support for alternate author theories have not yet gone beyond opinions based on interpretations. Unless it does, it would be rash to rewrite the history books. So the next time you read a play of the Bard from Avon, think critically about the mystery that was created so perfectly hundreds of years ago and still intrigues the world as much. If you like the content of this video, do like and subscribe to my channel Meet Meenamma. Don't forget to click the bell icon for regular updates. Also do comment and interact with Meenamma. I would love your opinions. Meenamma looks forward to meeting you again in the next video and episode. Let us together take a long journey into yet another mystery that intrigues me. Till then, ladies and gentlemen, have a great life and make a difference. Oi, Meenamma. Oi, 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 Meenamma.